In the brutal winter of 1849, a frail 14-year-old girl named Emma Fitzgerald convinced the entire town of Milbrook, Massachusetts, that she could speak with the dead. For 3 long months, grief-stricken families formed lines outside the humble Irish Catholic Church, clutching silver coins and stained letters, desperate to hear one last message from their lost loved ones. They believed Emma's pale face and piercing green eyes marked her as a vessel of divine grace. What they could never imagine was that her gift came from something far darker than God. The Fitzgerald family had constructed a deception so complex, so merciless, that when the truth finally seeped into daylight, it shattered not only the faith of its victims, but their very will to go on living. The Catholic Church buried the scandal deep in its archives for over a century, sealing away records that spoke of betrayal, manipulation, and a creeping darkness that hollowed out an entire community from within. Before we continue unraveling the story of Emma Fitzgerald and what may be the most diabolical religious fraud in American history, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Let us know in the comments what city or state you're watching from. We love hearing from fellow seekers of forgotten American horrors. Emma's tale does not begin with miracles, but with years of careful planning. The year was 1849, when Irish immigrants were still viewed with suspicion and hostility in New England's Protestant strongholds. Milbrook, a mill town of barely 800 souls, clung to life between frozen rivers and soot-stained factory walls. From dawn until dusk, the clang of textile machinery echoed through the valley, mixing with the stench of dye and wool. Snow piled high, turning dirt roads into mud and ice, cutting off the town from the wider world for months. 5 years earlier, St. Brigid's Catholic Church had appeared in Milbrook, purchased outright with a chest of gold by Father Cornelius Fitzgerald, a towering figure with hair-streaked silver and blue eyes so sharp they seemed to pierce straight through a person's soul. No one understood how an Irish priest had acquired such wealth, but the town accepted him out of need. He carried himself with refinement, his Irish accent softened, deliberate. When cholera swept through the mill workers' cramped housing, he walked among the dying without fear, delivering last rites and consoling families. He always seemed to know exactly what words to speak to calm the grieving. And yet, behind his charisma, lurked an unsettling depth of knowledge, secrets of families, sins whispered in the confessional, hidden failures that made him both trusted and quietly feared. Living in the rectory was his niece Emma, a pale girl with streaks of gray in her hair, despite her youth, her green eyes holding a strange, aged sorrow. She had arrived from Ireland mute, said to be traumatized by horrors she had seen during the crossing. The townsfolk pitied her as she silently swept church floors and tended herbs in the garden with uncanny skill. Her silence gave her an aura of mystery. Her aunt, Martha Fitzgerald, ran the household with iron discipline, her thick accent unpolished, compared to Cornelius's careful speech. Known for her herbal remedies and midwife skills, she earned wary respect from Milbrook's women. Her husband, Patrick, a burly sawmill worker, blended into the community with a reputation for reliability. What no one realized was that the Fitzgerald family had spent 5 years listening, recording, and memorizing every whispered secret in town. Father Fitzgerald kept meticulous notes in Gaelic, detailing not only scenes, but family histories, financial troubles, forbidden romances, and hidden debts. It was a treasure trove of information, more valuable than gold. And when the winter of 1849 struck with merciless cruelty, leaving the town raw with grief, the Fitzgeralds decided the time had come. The transformation began one freezing February morning during Mass. The church was packed, breath clouding the air as families huddled for warmth. That morning, Mrs. Ellen Hutchinson collapsed in the third pew, overwhelmed with grief for her 6-year-old son who had died just weeks before. Her cries echoed through the stone walls, shattering the congregations. composure. As Father Fitzgerald stepped down to console her, something extraordinary happened. From the back of the church, where Emma always sat in silence, a clear, melodic voice rang out. "Thomas says not to cry, Mama. He says the angels are teaching him to read just like you always wanted." The crowd froze. Emma, mute for 5 years, was speaking. Her face glowed as if lit from within, her head tilting as though listening to someone invisible. She described a wooden toy horse Thomas had carved and hidden under his bedroom floorboards. Only Mrs. Hutchinson had ever discovered it. Then Emma spoke of a lullaby the grieving mother had sung only in private, words no one else had ever heard. The church fell into a stunned silence. Emma, when she finally blinked and seemed to wake, looked dazed, confused, as though she hadn't known she was speaking. Father Fitzgerald declared it a miracle, a vessel chosen by God to comfort the mourning. But behind the performance were years of preparation. Emma had been trained, fed every detail collected by her family's web of gossip, confessions, and observations. Word of the miracle spread faster than fire on dry brush. Soon, families brought offerings, coins, heirlooms, keepsakes, begging Emma to summon their dead. Each session seemed to confirm her divine gift, a hidden set of carpentry tools, a secret blessing whispered on a wedding night. Intimate scars known only to a spouse. Emma revealed them all with eerie accuracy. The Fitzgerald family ran their scheme with precision. Patrick gathered men's gossip at taverns. Martha collected secrets in quilting circles and birthing rooms. Cornelius extracted confessions and deathbed wishes. Together, they created an intelligence network, masquerading as divine revelation. Emma's séances were staged with theatrical brilliance, candles, shadows, ritualistic gestures, all crafted to convince. But as Emma's fame grew, so too did suspicion. Reverend Samuel Hartwell of the Protestant Church began cross-checking her revelations. Dr. Ezekiel Thorne, the town physician, was unsettled by her medical knowledge, details no child should know. The first fatal crack came when Emma relayed a message about a business deal that hadn't existed when the supposed spirit was alive. Timothy McBride, a sharp young man, immediately spotted the impossibility. Quietly, Timothy and Dr. Thorne began comparing notes. They uncovered patterns. Emma's messages always matched recent confessions, medical diagnoses, or whispered gossip. Families were manipulated into donations or decisions that benefited the Fitzgeralds. Even more horrifying, deaths of doubters and critics showed symptoms consistent with subtle poisoning: arsenic, mercury virtually undetectable at the time. The facade began to collapse when Emma delivered a message from a man who was, in fact, still alive. Father Fitzgerald tried to claim she had seen a prophetic vision of his death, but the explanation rang hollow. For Dr. Thorne and Timothy McBride, it was confirmation. The Fitzgeralds were not only liars, but killers willing to orchestrate deaths to protect their scheme. The two men now faced a nightmare: expose the Fitzgeralds, and they would destroy the fragile faith and comfort that dozens of grieving families clung to. But if they stayed silent, more lives would be lost. Father Fitzgerald's journals revealed ambitions to expand their operation into nearby towns, grooming other children like Emma as future vessels. The people of Milbrook believed they were witnessing miracles. In truth, they were trapped in one of the darkest frauds America had ever known. If this story chills you, share it with someone who loves dark history. Hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter, as we uncover just how far the Fitzgerald family's sinister reach extended beyond Milbrook. In the winter shadows of 1849, the Fitzgerald family's deception reached a breaking point. They had whispered of cousins still in Ireland, waiting to be brought to America, once their scheme grew rich enough to support an entire network of so-called mediums. But their grip on Milbrook began to unravel when Mrs. Catherine Brennan stormed into Dr. Thorne's office, clutching a letter with shaking hands. She swore her late husband had dictated it through Emma during a séance that had drained Nearly a month of her wages, the letter described, in painstaking detail. A hidden stash of gold coins, landmarks, measurements, instructions so precise they seemed beyond the imagination of a teenage girl. Convinced her husband's spirit was trying to provide from beyond the grave, Catherine poured her life savings into excavation. She borrowed against her home, hired men to dig, and tore her modest property into a scarred wasteland of trenches. When Dr. Thorne studied the letter, a sick recognition struck him. It was written in Father Fitzgerald's own careful hand. He had seen that script before in medical forms, parish records, even the priest's private journals. The so-called message from beyond was nothing but a forged trick. Worse still, the loan Catherine had taken to fund her futile dig came from Patrick Fitzgerald himself, signed at an interest rate she could never hope to repay. They had set the trap so cleanly that her ruin was guaranteed. As Thorne and Timothy McBride dug deeper, they found that Catherine's tragedy was not unique. Family after family had been lured by the same divine messages, pushed into disastrous decisions, bound into debts and contracts that always led back to the Fitzgeralds. What looked like spiritual guidance was in fact a finely tuned engine of financial manipulation. Grief had become the family's most profitable weapon, but the Fitzgeralds were watching their investigators as carefully as they watched their victims. Father Fitzgerald noticed Dr. Thorne's sharper questions, Timothy's probing conversations, the whispers spreading through town after Emma's sessions. His web of informants was too tight to be pierced. The warning came swiftly. 3 nights after Thorne exposed the forged letter, Benjamin Fuller, the mill worker whose early death had first raised suspicions, was found lifeless in his boarding house. Officially, it was heart failure. Thorne's examination told a darker truth: digitalis poisoning, drawn easily from foxglove. The message was unmistakable. The Fitzgeralds knew they were being hunted and were ready to kill to protect their secrets. On a rain-lashed April night, with storm clouds pressing down like an omen, Dr. Thorne and McBride gathered their courage. They had arranged to meet Reverend Hartwell and 2 respected townsmen, James Richardson and Samuel Morrison, in the Protestant church, the one place where the Catholic priest's authority faltered. They planned to present their evidence, to break the silence. But when the oil lamps lit the stark whitewashed walls, they found him already waiting. Father Fitzgerald sat calmly in the front pew, Emma beside him, her pale cheeks streaked with tears that shimmered like molten silver. He had known of the meeting before it was even settled. Someone close to them had betrayed them. "I know why you've come," the priest said, his voice smooth, steady, terrifyingly calm. "And I know what you believe you've uncovered. But before you destroy the faith of this community, you must understand what you're truly confronting." What followed was not a defense, it was a confession. Fitzgerald revealed that Milbrook had been chosen with precision. Its isolation, its heavy immigrant population, its weak record-keeping, its endless supply of grief. The family had scouted for months before settling here, perfecting their tricks in famine-stricken villages back in Ireland. Emma's silence upon arrival had been deliberate, a theatrical setup for her miraculous gift of speech. The priest spoke with pride, describing their system: Martha's herb garden visits to spy on families, Patrick's tavern talk for financial intelligence, Emma's sharpened skill at reading grief etched into faces. And then he revealed the darkest truth of all. From beneath his black coat he produced a ledger, thick, worn, horrifying. Inside were names, financial records, and private details. Yes, but also medical notes, illnesses, and dates of death. They hadn't merely predicted death, they had manufactured it. Arsenic, mercury, foxglove, all measured and administered with chilling precision. Mrs. Hartwell's wasting sickness, young Daniel Murphy's fever, William Carter's heart failure, all orchestrated murders to make Emma's visions look miraculous. The grief that had driven families to Emma's side was engineered by the very people they trusted most. As realization spread, The church fell into stunned silence, and then came the sound outside shouting torches, a crowd approaching through the storm. Word of the meeting had spread, and the victims themselves were arriving for answers. For the first time, Father Fitzgerald's composure cracked. He had wanted to control the narrative, to contain the truth. Now he faced the very people whose lives he had destroyed. The fallout was immediate and devastating. Fitzgerald, Patrick, and Martha were arrested, but the law of 1849 had no precedent for crimes of such psychological cruelty. Within 3 nights in jail, all 3 were dead arsenic again. Whether by suicide or vigilante justice, no one ever knew. Emma was left behind only 14, both a tool and a victim. Her testimony revealed years of coercion, threats, and training that bound her to the family's crimes. Some demanded punishment. Dr. Thorne argued for mercy. In the end, she was sent away under a new name to distant relatives in Pennsylvania, never to return. The Fitzgerald home was burned, their records destroyed. Even the church was stripped of its symbols and converted to a town hall, though eventually it too was abandoned, too haunted by memory for the community to bear. The scars ran deeper than buildings. Families who had clung to messages from the dead now doubted their own grief, their own faith. Some left Milbrook altogether, unable to endure the shame of their gullibility. The town withered in the years that followed. Dr. Thorne remained until his death in 1867, transformed into a meticulous record-keeper, desperate never again to miss the signs of poison. Timothy McBride fled westward, his faith shattered, his life devoted to rooting out frauds. Neither man would ever forget Milbrook's lesson, and that lesson is this: grief is a weapon in the hands of those who understand it. The Fitzgeralds didn't just steal money, they destroyed the most sacred human belief, that love endures beyond death. So I'll leave you with a question. Do you believe everything was uncovered that stormy April night? Or might there have been other families, perfecting the same cruel craft in other towns, hidden in the cracks of history? If you've ever met someone who seemed to know impossible truths about your loved ones, or if you've noticed deaths too convenient to be, chance you may already know the answer. The past is full of secrets, and we're only beginning to unearth them.